Hey, Clif.
Hello, that's what that number is. Okay. So what part of...
Yeah, Tokyo.
Oh, yeah, I've got friends that are south of there in the Aikido community.
hmm Yeah, years ago I did Aikido back in the States. But yeah. Well, the whole Fukushima thing. So we know
Yeah.
a little bit about that, but probably not too much to say at this point. Run for the hills, right?
Yeah, but in the immediate environment, yeah, but globally, we're all going to be dealing with it. I think we just need to take another approach. Plutonium and all this kind of stuff is indeed fatal, but there's a huge body of evidence, some of which has to be valid just on the sheer mass of it, that certain radiation treatments do indeed work.
Yeah, and then there's probably ways of removing radiation in the sense of making its half-life go from 1,000 years to 1 year or something like that.
That brings up that whole issue of the time guys, because I've tried repeatedly to contact them just to berate them into doing just this, at least making the attempt, putting a bubble around the reactors there and bombarding it, or even restricting time to it as long as it was isolated by, something on the order of 1/30,000th of a millisecond, something on those orders. It would be impervious to light and all of us, and the radiations couldn't get through. But the curious thing about that, perhaps not so curious given the sequence of events, is you cannot find these people now. They just have disappeared into the deep dark holes, and they're not reachable.
Well, I recall reading years ago research that was done with half-life measurements, and it was possible to change it. They were changing it in different ways. I forget bombarding it with UV, or they were doing different things.
Well, the sound bubble guys too, the cold fusion, yeah, they did that. They were able to restrict the Italians were able to restrict the half-life, cut it in half. So they took cesium-137 and took it down from a couple of years to on the order of 18 months, and then did it again. And it wasn't quite as successful, but I think it was reduced the half-life on it down to 11 or 12 months.
That's an example, but anyway, I definitely recall reading different people working on that in a very limited way. But everything is lost in the internet now. There's just no way of ever finding anything, right?
Yeah, right. The spew. No, actually.
Started that thread. Where is Mr. Anderson? Hi, Cliff. Groundrod here.
Yeah, how you doing?
Good.
All right, Cliff, are you ready to get started?
Oh, I thought we had. Sorry.
Pretty much.
There's a fine line.
Okay, yeah, I'll sit here and you can do the formal introductions and stuff.
Okay. Jules, are you ready?
Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Jules, and today is Friday, the 9th of December 2011. Today we have Clif High from halfpasshuman.com. Clif is the godfather of the webbots, which uses linguistics on the internet to forecast the future. Beware of fake imitations made in China, Google, and the CIA. Hi Clif, welcome to the Webbot Forum Roundtable.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone.
The Webbot Forum administrator and producer of the show is Fox, and he'll be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us tonight. They include members Green Meadow, Herm, Lua in Colorado, Plain, and Rusky. This interview will be available on YouTube for free on the Time Monk radio channel and at the website webbotforum.com. For listeners, this interview will assume you have a good understanding of Clif's work. Blah, 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 and more blah. With time so short for this interview and for humanity's collective future in the form of a hard wall data gap. Clif, Are you ready to get right into it, sir?
Sure. We need to cover one little tiny thing first, and that is I'd like to take this moment to thank everybody who sent emails to Kathy on her birthday. It's been just probably the best birthday present she could have had, and kudos to George for suggesting it.
Yes, it was. I think it was on Urban Survival.
Yeah, thank you. Again, thank you very much, everyone. Yes, she really appreciated it.
Great. Okay, the first section we wanted to have was we wanted to discuss with you a number of questions, and I think you also wanted to talk a little bit about the data gap upcoming in March. But the first question we had, Cliff, was the big picture. A lot of us would like to know what you think the big picture was or is. Understanding the big picture enables readers of your work to put a context to your forecasts. With the data gap approaching rapidly, could you please spend some time to tell us what the big picture is from your viewpoint and what subjects in your news report are the most compelling in your view and need more elaboration tonight?
The most compelling actually gets us into the big picture, and that is the largest thing that can possibly dominate us, which is the sun. Ever since we began the work in 1997, the thing that has struck and stayed and has always been there has been sun disease. That said, has grown continuously regardless of the entity associations, the way we would slice and dice the data around it. It continued to grow. It continues to grow to this point. There is in our work some reason to think that there is a connection, statistically valid, evidentiary, and cause and effect unknown between the sun and the roiling of our collective consciousness here on the planet in all different forms at different levels. So, from my viewpoint, the single largest connection I can make between the hard data gap coming up and the rise in the immediacy data is with the rise also in disturbance or extra energy coming out of the sun. I don't have any, other than the data showing up, I don't have a one-to-one correlation between a release data period and the sun acting up. There are some general connections that seem to happen in a broad sinusoidal wave matching resonance or entrainment manner, but we don't have enough data to make any correlate or direct connection to it. However, I have this like intuitive sense or gut sense that the sun, in turning out all of the external energies, the extra energies that we're not able to ascertain with our equipment or our senses, is indeed monkeying with our minds, so to speak. It's like aggravating the monkeys, getting them hot and sweaty and not offering relief year after year after year. And that continued level of external pressure on us has, in my opinion, needs to be acknowledged at a personal and a collective level such that we can dispose of it from our thinking, if that sort of makes sense. My idea being that I used to do, let me state, way back when I was a youngster and was doing community service to people just because I needed to do that sort of thing. I was on a hotline where people would call in with all kinds of mental distress, and my specialty was dealing with people that were on drugs, very hard drugs frequently, and talking them down to a reasonable state and getting them the assistance that they needed. And I would usually do the very late night shift from like midnight until 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. In any event, there's a common maxim there that you can't talk someone out of it until everyone has acknowledged it. And that's basically what we have to do here. Many times people would call in and not know that they had been drugged, especially in more recent times where drugs were used for nefarious purposes rather than recreational or other uses. And so you would have to get them to recognize that they were indeed operating not in their normal frame of mind and in a temporarily induced, externally controlled state. And once you get them over that hurdle, then a lot of other things start falling off and they can start taking a breath. The anxiety goes away to a certain extent and you can talk them down out of it. I think we need to think of that in a collective species level. Our species is being bombarded with radiation that is affecting our mental processes, yet we do not consciously examine that as it's occurring to us and reflect on what it's doing to our processes and maybe rethink where we're at. Now, to a certain extent, maybe this is how universe has decided it should be, that the vast majority of humans should become a boiling, monkey-minded mass in the year 2000, such that we can shed the paternalistic and closing history and organizations that attempt to control us. In other words, the very great mass of universe moving our history via the energies out of the sun kind of a deal. But the aware observer caught in the roiling mass of what's coming ahead will do well to remember that they are also being affected by these energies from the sun. And once you know that, you can sort of eliminate them from your thinking and take them into account. Oh, yeah, it's kind of like saying, there are not really iridescent blue geckos crawling on my wall. It may appear that way, but I'm just going to ignore them and go about my business. That sort of thing, right?
Yes, take a deep breath before you make a decision, yes.
Correct. But also make sure that every time you make that decision, you sort of run like a little power on self-test to check your basic hardware, because it'll be our hardware that's going to be affected. And that in turn is going to cause some very, sometimes not so subtle, but could be subtle error states within our thinking.
Let me ask it this way then, Cliff. Maybe you can just acknowledge with a quick short yes or no if you still think so. Do you think that there will still the global financial system needs to collapse before the Israeli-Iran war?
I don't think it needs to. I think that the Israelis will be held in abeyance until that has occurred to at least some greater extent, because it necessarily causes an effect to the powers that be that they don't want just yet. The issue is this. The price of oil at the time that the Israelis attack Iran instantly doubles, if not triples, which causes basically all the entire petrodollar system to, in and of itself, collapse. And it will not recover, because any currency that ever collapses in any way never, ever, ever recovers, simply because it's an issue of confidence. And once confidence is lost, you cannot regain it unless that entire generation dies out. That's why when we have many currencies, they are renamed and changed and so on to get different generational allegiances with them. It's sort of a mind trick. So the powers that be know that the Israelis attacking Iran is going to let loose a hell that from that point on is to a certain extent undetermined. But one thing that is predictable is the huge rise in the cost of oil, a thing that they wish to have occur, but they wish to have it occur after they have finished their looting of the current currency system and before the petrodollar dies. And basically, the petrodollar is dying of its own weight now, and they'll just sort of hesitate and delay until they reach a point where they say, oh, okay, there's not really much left to be wrung out of the system. We can let the Israelis go ahead now.
Is the Israel, Iran, and Middle East war precursor to World War III? It
is World War III. There is no differentiation. Once that begins, if it is allowed to, and that is undetermined, and that we need to talk about at some point in terms of how determinism really works. But if the Israeli mistake were to occur and that language were to manifest as we had forecast, that fundamentally is going to be World War III at this point, because we have conscious statements from the Chinese and the Russians that attacks on their allies are attacks on them, and they will respond. We also have aggressive moves by the Russians and the Chinese out in the open as clear signals that they are not going to hesitate to respond. It's not an empty threat in this case. So in my mind, if the